Greetings everyone, my name is DJ. I am the creator of the reality synthesis manifesting theory, and I coach on this model that, well, nobody else knows about, talks about, understands but me, because I created this new model to explain manifestation that nobody else really seems to get, because the standard model is, well, it's heavily flawed. It's failed, in my data, 95% of people, right? Most people think that whatever you focus on is what you get. Wrong. Or, in other words, what you assume is what you get, which is only partially correct. There's more to it than just what you assume, because there are assumptions within other assumptions, and we'll get into what that is and how they interact and all that, because the primary components of reality describe into such extreme precision how and why manifesting works and what it is, and thoroughly refutes the standard model and the explanations of that model. There is no spiritual law that is the so-called law of assumption. It doesn't exist. All right, it does not exist. It does not exist. There is no spiritual law that manifests things for you. Do you understand? The law is the mechanics of reality that I'm going to outline right now. The mechanics of reality is the law. Quantum mechanics is another heavily flawed model that does not explain manifestation. To quickly refute that model, the longitudinal interferometry explains the observer effect. For example, the Ingo-Swann experiments. There is no way that reality is probabilistic in any way, shape or form. Nothing is random, nothing is probabilistic, everything is divinely ordered and proportional. There is nothing random about anything. Your birth conditions can be explained with this. The standard model can't do that. Because if your thoughts create an infant which cannot conceive of ideas, manifests things that it cannot even conceive of, somehow. It can't do that. It doesn't have the potential to conceive of the things that are done to it in many circumstances. It doesn't work. The standard model is heavily flawed and it needs to be replaced. Okay? The law of assumption, the law of attraction, the law of whatever the heck you want to call it, it needs to be replaced. And that's what this is all about. Reality synthesis will replace the law of assumption and the like models surrounding the explanations of manifestation. Because this is the correct explanation that describes how and why manifesting works and how you can apply it to manifest anything consistently, reliably, without overthinking, without living in your head all day trying to make things happen, right? This works for everybody. It doesn't care what you think about it. It doesn't care. It is the law. It is the mechanics of reality. Law of assumption thinks that all you have to do is assume things differently. It doesn't work like that, right? There is more to building an assumption and how assumptions integrate within each other that influences how your reality is manifest. It's not just what you think. It's what you think and feel that interacts to build context. Context builds meaning. Meaning builds identification. Identification builds states. And your general dwelling state is the primary means through which your reality is manifest. Which of course also governs your perceptions and how you show up for yourself in life. We'll get into more of that later though. To get into the main mechanics of this, there are three primary principles that govern all phenomena in reality. All phenomena without any exceptions, okay? All of them can be explained with these principles. Process representing an emanation. Emanationism, emanationary process. It's kind of hard to describe this because there is no technical terminology for what I'm trying to describe here. Emanationism is the idea behind it, but I kind of applied in a different way. Process represents cyclic unfoldment of the primary principle of reality is emanationary process. Process simply refers to an ever-eternal cycling principle that unfolds. Right? Think of it as the driving force of reality, right? The monad, the eternal, ever unchanging and yet still changing principle that underlies and governs and supports and produces all phenomena in reality without any exceptions. Fundamentally, this is what you are. That is what you are fundamentally. You are the source of emanation. And when I say source, I'm not talking about the theosophical idea of source, which of course most people hear that and they don't even know where that comes from. Comes from theosophy, Helena Blavatsky's writings, the 1800s. She didn't know anything about reality whatsoever. She knew nothing about reality, and it all needs to be discarded. All this multidimensional reality nonsense, it needs to be discarded because it doesn't work. There is no spiritual realm. It doesn't work, okay? There are mechanics of reality that explain all of this stuff, and the phenomena that you experience, seemingly as, extra-dimensional experiences, it can be explained with this stuff reliably, okay? I've been through a lot of those experiences myself and I understand how they work. Now, process necessitates within it a phase change, a variance in states of polarization over a period of time that is what creates a frequency. You always hear people talking about Nikola Tesla. You know, that if you want to understand the secrets of reality, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Well, that all is process, okay? All of that is process. Energy is an amplitude, a measure of magnitude, right? Without something to generate magnitude through, there cannot be energy. A frequency, as we just said, is a rate of change over a period of time, rate of change of polarization over a period of time. And the vibration necessitates a medium. What is vibrating? What is waving? Electromagnetic waves, for example, what is waving? The quantum field, most people would say. Someone's probably going to clip that. But I would say nonsense. The quantum field doesn't exist. There is no quantum field. Everybody who talks about that doesn't know anything about anything, okay? Everybody who talks about quantum mechanics knows nothing about how reality works. All of them. Every single one of these gurus who refers to quantum mechanics as the explanation for how this works is way off track. Let's just say that. They're all way off track. None of them understand how reality works. Nothing is probabilistic. Nothing is random. There is no such thing as a wave-particle duality, right? There is no variance to how things unfold. Everything is divinely proportional and structured and coherent. There is nothing that is random or probabilistic. Wave function collapse can be explained, and Schrodinger's equation can be explained with longitudinal interferometry, all right? And Jim Keller, the legend that created basically every great microarchitecture, including the Zen architecture that recently came out from AMD, he said that he thinks that quantum computers are a scam because they've never been demonstrated to do what they say they do. That's out of Jim Keller's mouth, not mine. I heard him say that on one of his talks. Most of you don't even know who Jim Keller is. Most of you aren't into that stuff, but I'm just giving you, you know, for the skeptics out there who want to try and refute my model. You're wrong, right? Process is a primary principle which underlies and governs all things. Now, process relies on a medium. There must be a medium to wave, right? In order for states of polarization to change, there must be a medium. What is this medium? It's not the quantum field. It's not some, you know, abstract idea of some magical substance. It is an ether. The classical model of the ether correctly explains how and why manifestation works. It doesn't have to be purely a mechanical ether. It also can be a chemically reactive ether. For example, Paul LaViolette's model of subquantum kinetics, which explains many of these things, but not everything. It's not 100% correct, but it's pretty close. This medium is the substrate through which electromagnetic induction can take place, and also through which your mind can exist as. You are the ether. You are the source of emanation. And the ether within itself also contains, you know, properties. It contains hysteresis cycles, which is, you know, basically the ether acting upon itself. Its resistance against its own properties. Now, Nikola Tesla, for example, was working with, I can't remember the dude's name. It's in one of Gary Vassilatos' talks around the, I don't know, 20-something minute mark. And he was talking about how he thought of the ether as a pre-hydrogen ultra-rarefied gaseous medium, as in it actually had tangible existence in reality. This is what Nikola Tesla said, right? He said that this medium must exist. All of you Nikola Tesla fans out there, none of what Nikola Tesla said supports the quantum model in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. He thoroughly refuted atomism. He thoroughly refuted the idea of relativity. He thought Einstein was a fuzzy-head crackpot, right? And he had nothing to do with the standard model at the time, even though the so-called Michelson-Morley experiment was, you know, what appears to be the driving force for how relativity came into place. In reality, the Michelson-Morley experiment never refuted the existence of the ether. It never did. And every great electrical engineer and physicist at the time, pretty much all of them, still worked with the model of the ether. All of them. Charles Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, Maxwell still did, but the Maxwellian ether was flawed. It didn't work. I think Maxwell died before the Michelson-Morley experiment. Nikola Tesla, he had his own model of... Basically, everybody had their own little variants on the model of the ether to explain how things worked. Because there was no agreed-upon model that existed. There was no official etheric physics model that existed back then. It was... Everybody had their own hypothesis of what, you know, the substrate of reality was. Nikola Tesla thought that it was a pre-hydrogen, ultra-rarefied, gaseous medium, right? That's what he... So you could imagine reality as filled with this infinitely expansive medium. Think of it like okay, so you know in air, when you wave your hand, you can feel the currents of the air against your arm. Imagine two waves, two currents of air colliding, and at the given frequency that they're perturbing at, although the air doesn't necessarily, perturb at a frequency, but you can imagine etheric perturbance as the same. Etheric perturbance takes upon itself a specific state of polarization over a period of time representing the frequency. And that would then also have a given amplitude, which would represent vibration, and that would be the expression of energy. Energy is not a thing, it's the expression of potential, right? The potential is expressed through the amplitude at a given frequency over a period of time. Now let's go to the next point here. We'll get to the practical side. I know many of you, who watch this for the first time, this is like, I don't want to hear about the mechanics, I just want to know how to manifest my SP, I feel bad, I want to feel better. Yeah, we're getting there, just wait, alright? We're getting there, just hold on. You must understand this. If you don't understand this, you're not going to be able to manifest what you want reliably. If you want to follow this model, right? Because when you truly understand this, you will not doubt, you will not question. I'm giving you the keys to understand how you have the power in reality without making you pay for it like most people do. I'm not telling you that you're some spiritual, God-like being who has all power. I'm telling you that you are the source of emanation as the mechanics of reality. I'm explaining how you work. Do you understand? I'm literally explaining to you how you work, the instruction manual of the human being. That's what reality synthesis is. Proportionality represents the ratio between these processes. Now, these processes can also be integrated within each other at a given ratio. So when we talk about proportionality, we're talking about a proportionality of two components. There must be two components for there to be a ratio between, correct? If we have cycles, processes within processes, they have to integrate at a specific ratio. That represents the proportionality of what I'm referring to as a self-recursive circuit. A self-recursive circuit, by definition, necessitates the existence of consciousness. Self-recursion is consciousness. Process is consciousness. Let that sink in for a second. Process is consciousness. The unfolding cycle of input-output phenomena is consciousness. Is consciousness. Okay, it is consciousness. Process is consciousness. Make no mistake. I'm going to continue to say that until the end of time because that's what it is. Input-output phenomena, positive, negative charge, solar-lunar aspects. The dualism here, right? The dualism interacts to form new components. And when we integrate cycles within other cycles, they have a proportionality that represents the position of either destructive collapse of energy or non-destructive collapse and integration of components. Now let's actually explore how information exists, right? Information exists as the interaction between cycles. It does not exist fundamentally. You have two principles. These two principles as processes interact with each other, and the interaction of these two principles forms something new that didn't previously exist. That's how something comes from nothing. And process necessitates what seems to be a variable output, but it's not. It's because there are processes integrated within other processes, and you're only looking at one little part of the bigger picture. It's a fractal field, right? It's a fractal, proportional, commensurate field geometry pathway that follows a progression. And until you actually get to the root of that progression, you can't predict how anything else works because you're only looking at one stage on a complete, process playing out. Processes within other processes. You have to get to the very root, the core process that exists within all other processes integrated within that, in order to shift all of the other processes within it. All of the other processes integrated within that one process can be shifted through the larger process because they all rely on the larger process for its existence. Interferometry is the next point. Interferometry is the science of wave interference, wave mixing, right? It's the science of how etheric perturbance influences itself, fundamentally, right? So when you have waves of the ether, right, at a given polarization over a period of time, given a frequency, an amplitude, a vibration, we have waves mixing. Now, I like to think of this as two circles. You see how there are three things here? A Venn diagram has three aspects to it, but there are only two circles. Two circles combine to create a third principle. The synthesis, reality synthesis. The third principle is created through the interaction of two things that previously fundamentally did exist. And we'll get into how this is working right now. Why you don't have a subconscious mind is this. Your conscious mind, as a cycle, is integrated within an unconscious mind, the greater cycle, as your nervous system. Your conscious mind is integrated within the nervous system of the body. Hence why you are bound to emotional output, because you can't escape that, because that's how reality works. An emotional output requires a sensory input. An input, an output. Do you understand? Input, output, process unfolding, consciousness, reality, thought processes, emotions. Are you starting to get the picture now? This is why I have to explain this stuff. Most people look at this and they click off because they get bored. I want to manifest my SP. I want to feel better. Well, figure it out and you'll manifest them. We're getting there. So your consciousness is integrated within your unconscious mind. Right? It doesn't exist fundamentally. Sorry, the subconscious mind doesn't exist fundamentally. The subconscious mind is the creation, the product of this interaction, just as these interactions up here necessitated something new, right? The Venn diagram. When the conscious mind overlaps and integrates within an aspect, an area of the unconscious mind, you have the experience of phenomena as the input phenomena, resulting in the output phenomena, which is again the emotional output and the manifest reality. So the subconscious mind is a product of the conscious mind overlapping the unconscious mind. Simple, right? Waves mixing, waves interacting. It's not hard to understand. You have a solar and a lunar aspect. Positive, negative charge, input, output. Conjugate principles. Proportionality, interferometry. Process within process. Do you understand? That's how thoughts exist. That's how thoughts connect. That's how thoughts integrate. That's how emotional output is formed. That's how context is built. We're going to get to that next. This is the important part. If you're waiting for the practical part of this, here you go. Here's the practical part. Context. Very important to understand what context is. Context is meaning, right? The meaning that we have on ourselves and of our desires and of whatever else relies on our imagination. You always hear Neville Goddard talking about your imagination is God. Well, kind of, but not really. We won't really go into that right now. Concept and feeling. Neville Goddard referred to the feeling as something that's not an emotion. It's not an emotion. The feeling is not an emotion. The feeling is a different sense. It's a sixth sense. It's an intuitive sense. It's a knowing. Of course, all the big gurus out there love to dismiss the idea of knowing. They love to dismiss the intuition. They love to dismiss the nervous system and the body. Oh, you got to live in your head and manifest with your affirmations and your thoughts. Yeah, what a load of nonsense. Absolute trash. Illogical. It doesn't work. You get results that way. I'm not denying that you get results that way. But you're going to get results according to the feeling. And we're going to go into this right now. If you've been waiting for a practical side of this video, here it is. Concept is what you imagine. This is your imaginary sense. This is your non-imaginary sense. Understand that. You have two aspects to your senses. It's not just your imaginary senses and your tangible senses. There is a non-imaginary sense. In fact, there's actually multiple non-imaginary senses, but this is one of them, the feeling. The feeling is the intuitive sense, fundamentally. All right? It is non-imaginary. You cannot imagine the feeling. It's impossible. You cannot imagine the feeling. However, you can imagine to lead to a feeling. And you can also feel a feeling to lead to an imaginal scene, right? You don't they're conjugate principles, just as this interaction over here, right? You have the conscious aspect, which is what you think about, which is the imaginary scene that you think about, the affirmation that you think about, the visualization that you think about. The concept represents anything that comes out of your imagination, including anything that your tangible senses experience. That this is the tangible result of concept expressing as your imagination. Right, this is your imaginary sense. This is your non-imaginary sense. When these two senses overlap and interfere, just like these principles necessitated, go back and read it and watch it if you need to understand it, they generate meaning. A concept requires a feeling to have meaning. It's a reactionary process leading to an output, an emotional output. If you want to change the way you feel emotionally, you change the way you feel intuitively. So when we talk about people who continuously affirm all day, every day, and they do this trash that they live in their heads all day and they don't get anywhere and they drive themselves insane, what these people should be doing is stopping to try and to integrate the conceptual sense, the imaginary sense, while affirming to themselves or visualizing, and get out of their head and start feeling what it would be like. What would it feel like to have this thing? As Neville Goddard said, it's not hard, right? Neville Goddard talked about this stuff way back without understanding anything of what I'm just talking about here. But he was correct. Most of what Neville Goddard said was correct. Most. Context is built as meaning. Now, as I said, processes are built within processes. Context is a process that's generated through this interaction. Meaning that you apply to concepts through feeling, intuitive impulse, generates the meaning that we have and what we identify with. Yeah? The context is the meaning, and meanings interacting create identifications. Our default programming, if you wish, the way that we show up in reality. Let's get into a bit of state interferometry and what states are, because this is the next step. When you have these two principles coming together creating context, which, by the way, these two principles must exist for context to exist. Context cannot exist, just like the subconscious mind cannot exist without this interaction. The subconscious mind doesn't exist in and of itself. It cannot be tangible. It's a product of an interaction. Context, meaning, necessitates a feeling and a concept to have existence. These two principles must come together to form the third principle. It's like in, the Taoist text. The one created the two, and the two created the three, and the three created the five, and the five created everything else, right? You could go into the five created the eight and the whole, 8 gates and whatnot, but that's kind of irrelevant. Context necessitates meaning, and of course meaning builds identification, and then identification, right? Identification is then integrated within states. States. We always hear about states. Everybody always talks about states. Got to get into the state of the wish fulfilled. The state. Well, guess what? Most of the time that you're in a state, you don't even realize you're in a state. Why? Because states are necessitated by feelings, by meanings. The way that you feel about something necessitates the meaning that you have on what you're imagining, thus determining the pathway that you're expressing through in a state. This is kind of difficult to explain to someone who doesn't have background in this stuff, but when you have contextual sense that is built, when you have meaning that is built upon a concept that you're thinking of, say for example your SP, you're thinking about your SP, my SP loves me, right? You want to manifest your specific person. And the first thing that comes up to your mind is an anxiety. You have this anxiety when you affirm to yourself, they love me, they want me. I want you to go into that feeling, I want you to go into that emotional output, I want you to retrace where it comes from. I have a video on this on my channel. I want you to trace where that thought comes from by following the progression of the thoughts that come from it. So you go into that thought of the anxiety, another thought will come up. You go into that thought, and another thought will come up. And you continuously trace it back to where it came from on the chain of progression within the chain of cycles integrated within each other. And eventually you'll get to the root. Okay? Integrated, all of the cycles that you went through, the thoughts that you were into, they are all integrated within the root thought process. Oh man, I can't even talk. The root thought process necessitates the very basis of all of these other processes. And when you refine and revise that primary process that exists and underlies everything else, then the entire pathway that you just went through will change. It will shift, right? Its place within the various states that you embody will be moved, and it will no longer bother you. You will no longer feel the anxiety. Go and watch the video. It's pinned. I'll try and make a card. It's called Persistence and Resistance. There are still a few little bits and pieces there that I didn't mention that should have been mentioned, but whatever. It works for most people. I've had everybody I work with who applies this model, they have breakthroughs, all of them, okay? Every single one, including myself. I developed it as a means of, working with this model. I literally created my own technique that nobody else knows about or talks about to resolve resistance, because nobody else had correct explanations as to how to do it based on this theory that I'm developing. Nobody else had correct techniques that worked. This one does work. Irrefutably it works. It gets to the very basis of where the context came from. And by revising the root cycle, you change the context, you change the feeling and the concept. Thus everything else changes. Because that's where the root of everything else comes from, right? The core of your identification, the way that you show up, the way that others show up for you. As Neville Goddard said, there is no one to change but self. So contexts are integrated within states. Now states, let's go more into states. I know I've said I wanted to go into states, it's scattered, but whatever. States, they can interact as well, just like feelings and concepts. States can interact and interfere with each other just like processes, because they're all processes. Everything is processes. Everything is processes within other processes. I hope that's abundantly clear at this point. Processes overlap and interfere with other processes interferometrically at a given ratio, integrated within each other. understand. Processes within processes, states within states. States contain identifications. All right? States contain identifications through which emotional output is necessitated by. Now, when you're in a state of the wish fulfilled, you've generated something called a state. You would want to be generating something called a state streak, which is a reference state. Here's another practical tip for you. If you want to manifest what you want, you need to have that as I don't really know how to put it, but call it a reference state, right? A reference state that you can draw yourself into. Having a reference state is important because when we build momentum in this reference state, it will begin to actually overlap other states as thoughts begin to integrate, right? And the pathways through which all of these thoughts integrate will overlap and interfere and actually change the structure of the totality of your mind and the states that you embody throughout the day. This is done through state streak, through embodying the feeling, through intuitive impulse. As I said, the feeling is an intuitive sense. So when you think, because remember, a concept can create a feeling. A concept can create a feeling. When you think of your reference state and your desire being fulfilled, it will generate the feeling of that being fulfilled, right? And that will then put you in a state. Ideally, it will not always put you in a state if you don't have the correct, affirmation visualization, but when you have the right one, you will likely feel it in your chest, around your pericardium meridian, and it will actually generate this feeling. You may actually learn to tap into it eventually, and you can tune into it and tap into that feeling, and then that will then create the concepts and the context, the meaning is applied, and the identification and the state. It's all again, it's all cycles within cycles. If that isn't abundantly clear, I don't know what more I need to say. There's an equation in electrical engineering. In order to get a watt, you have to have a volt and an amp. Without a volt and an amp, you cannot have a watt. Do you understand? Without a concept and a feeling, you cannot build context. All of the gurus out there who talk about manifesting only talk about concepts. They only talk about using your imagination. They don't talk about the feeling. They ignore the feeling. They ignore the intuitive sense. You have imaginal sense, you have tangible sense, and you have intuitive sense. Unconscious, conscious. Creating the subconscious, right? You cannot build an assumption without a feeling. You are always embodying a feeling at some time. Whether you're aware of it or not, it doesn't care, because it's an unconscious process. You are always integrating within a feeling, regardless of if you're aware of what that feeling is or not. It's always integrating and providing context for the concepts that you imagine, which is integrated as the state. And when you get into a state streak through reference state, you change the feeling, you change the way the states are aligned, and you change your reality. That's how things work. The interferometry of states, cycles within cycles. This is fundamentally where the change comes from, right here, right? It fundamentally comes from down here, but in terms of how it expresses, it's up here, the top of the chain, right? How thoughts are integrated is like this. You have themes that run through all of this stuff, all of these different states. You have themes that play out, patterns that play out, and they usually have basis in pretty much all of your states. And so when you refine these states through getting in state streaks by integrating the feeling, that will actually shift all of these disproportionalities between these various states that cause emotional ups and downs, that cause you to falsely identify, that cause you to doubt, that cause all the negativity. Resistance is disproportionality, right? It is disproportionality. Proportionality is a zero resistive circuit. Disproportionality is a resistive circuit. Pain and suffering is the bleeding of charge. The opposite of that is a negative entropic field, the increase of charge, the increase of order, the increase of proportionality. Do you understand how everything's conjugate? I keep talking about this, but you must understand it, because that's primary principle that everything is governed by. Sensory input necessitates emotional output. When we refine what it is that we're inputting, on a feeling and a concept level, on a conscious and an unconscious level, we refine how our states are generated, and states actually begin to cohere. When you're in reference state and you're in state streak and you're flowing with that state, a state streak, just in case you're not aware, I've written so much about this and I've talked about this on my shorts, a state streak is where you're in flow with a specific state, a specific feeling and concept. An identification, if you wish, right? You're in flow with this one identification and you're not jumping up and down all the time. Time will fly, it will pass very quickly, and you will be generating ideal context. This continual generation of context by existing in the ideal state, by being driven by intuitive impulse, by tapping into the feeling, will cohere these disproportionalities in these states and dissolve resistance. This is going to change the way that you show up by default without thinking about it. You don't have to clip this, guys. You don't have to think about showing up differently to show up differently. You just have to change the way that you feel about what you're trying to do. And that will automatically generate context. My stupid shirt keeps falling down because of this mic. Context necessitates the coherence of states. State streaks is the means through which we do that. And we get into state streaks by getting into reference state, by imagining our desires and getting into that intuitive impulse that drives us. It's like an aha moment, a light bulb moment. You will want to go and do things in reality. You will want to do things. You will feel different. You will feel completely different. You will abandon the old self in that new state. As Neville Goddard says, self-abandonment is the secret. So when we abandon the self, what we're doing is we're actually cohering these states, in which it crystallizes and anchors in and makes it automatic, in which it just unfolds anyway. You don't have to think about it because it's anchored in. It's the context has generated a coherency within your field geometries that plays out whether you're aware of it or not, because that's your new default state that you've embodied. The new default state that you embodied was your reference state that contained the desires, the concepts, and the feelings of those desires being fulfilled, and thus the manifestations come through without even trying. You don't have to think about it all day, every day, because it's an unconscious process. Your entire reality unfolds unconsciously based on the feeling. If you're stuck around this long and you understand what I'm saying, there's nothing more that you need to understand. What I've told you right now is all you need to know. That's how you manifest everything. That's how you show up differently. That's how you act differently. That's how you want to act differently. That's how you identify differently without trying to identify differently. Unconscious thought processes are the secret. State streaks are the secret through feeling. State streaks are the secret, guys. Reference, okay, look, listen, I'm going to give you a formula. Listen to me, right? Listen to me very carefully. There is a formula that works for everybody. Reference state. You must have a reference state. This is the state of the wish fulfilled that you draw yourself back to. This is what you want. The concept, right? What you want is the concept, is the basis of this state, the reference state. And when you're in this reference state, if it is proportional to what you truly desire, and there's a zero resistive circuit there, you'll be tapping into what it is that you really desire. That will generate a feeling of it being fulfilled. Now you will likely lose this feeling because you've got all these other pathways playing out, and you're going to be jumping in and out if especially if you're living in your head. But if you can maintain this reference state by staying in that intuitive impulse, right? By actually, sometimes there's a little bit of effort that is required, a little bit of willpower that is required to continue this state, especially in the beginning. But after a couple of weeks, right? Usually in less than 3 weeks is usually how long it takes to build this I don't care about conditions and circumstances attitude, which is what this is building, right? The context, the meaning that is built from this concept and this feeling integrating within reference state, the aha moment, the intuitive impulse being generated that drives you into the world to actually fulfill what it is that you desire, which will also have an underlying theme to it. And when you think of this theme, that will be the anchor for the context at which you'll be generating. That theme will play out throughout all the states and will cohere the states, and it will actually make you not waver. You don't have to try to not waver. That's stupid. You can't not waver when you're in this place, because that's how you're identifying. And you're building coherence of states, which will automatically make you and reality show up that way. You will want to act in reality differently. You don't have to think about acting differently. You don't have to think about doing things differently. It will just happen because you're identifying differently, because you're feeling differently. You're building different meanings, building different associations, building different identifications and meanings, different contexts based on the concept. The feeling, the unconscious process is what drives all this. It's not the thoughts. When you think more of the same thing, you do manifest proof of that. You absolutely manifest proof of what you're doing. All of your thoughts manifest to an extent. But all of these thoughts that you're integrating, they must reflect the feeling. They absolutely must reflect the feeling, the limited identification, the limited meaning that you're applying to this on an unconscious level, an intuitive level. When you're continuously thinking about your SP loving you, but you still have anxieties and trash coming up underneath the surface, you're not going to get them. Very unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very unlikely for that to happen, which is what most people experience. And then you hear all these success stories of, actually there's really not a whole lot out there about people manifesting, because what most people don't understand is that there's a lifestyle that you'll need to get into if you wish. That's what your primary dwelling state is your main lifestyle, right? If you're in a lifestyle of lack, that's because you're in a state that's not got the ideal feeling. Your unconscious processes are not playing out the way that you want, and it's resistive, bleeding charge, emotional unfulfillment. So when you're continuously affirming to yourself that your SP loves you, you're going to see proof of that, but it's going to come in a limited way because it must reflect the feeling as the meaning. So you're going to manifest signs, you're going to manifest other people having what you want, you're going to manifest partial manifestations, them coming in and going, or them coming and being really into you and then leaving all of a sudden, abandoning you, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter about all these traumas, that's based on the feeling. The feeling is what is modulating with the context, right? Volts and amps combine to create watts. Without a volt and an amp, you cannot have a watt. Without a concept, an imaginary sense, without an intuitive, unimaginary sense, non-imaginary sense, you cannot build meaning. You cannot reassociate meaning, and you cannot build identification, you cannot build state. You cannot build state coherence. You cannot manifest what you want. It doesn't work like that. It never has and it never will. Go back to the principles. Thoughts integrated within other thoughts. Feelings integrated within other feelings, forming pathways. Meanings integrated within other meanings, forming identifications. Do we understand? I don't really know what else there is to go into here, really. When you're in state streak, generate state interferometry. State interferometry coheres the states, and you'll just unfold what you want to manifest. Your desired state, your reference state will unfold. Your reference state will unfold. There's nothing else to it than that. Whatever you imagine, whatever you focus on, as in whatever you continue to persist in, as in continue to persist feeling and associating meaning to, not thinking all the time. Persistence is not continual thinking. Persistence is not continual thinking. Hello? Persistence is not continual imaginal use. Persistence is persistence in the meaning, the association, the state, the reference state, the flow state. Do you understand? It's how you show up for yourself differently. It's how reality shows up for you differently. Meaning, feeling generates meaning according to concept. I've said it a million times, but you guys have to understand this. If you don't understand it, you can't manifest what you want. Reliably, at least. There's nothing else to it than that, really. There is no subconscious mind. There is no fundamental existence for meaning. You provide the meaning based on the feeling. When Neville Goddard says you determine the facts of life, this is what he means. When he says get into the state of the wish fulfilled, that's what he means. Cohere the states. When Neville Goddard says the feeling is the secret, he really did mean it's the secret, didn't he? He really knew it's the secret. Nobody talks about it. It really is a secret. Well, I'm talking about it, and I've just thoroughly refuted the law of assumption, because assumptions are built through feeling, not through thinking about it. You cannot build an assumption, an identification, without context. You cannot have a watt without a volt and an amp. You cannot build a assumption without both the combination, the interferometric interaction of processes integrating, of the imaginal sense and the intuitive sense, which will generate an intuitive impulse, which will generate you to actually show up in the world differently and for the world to show up differently for you, thus manifesting your reference state. As I said, when you imagine your desires, you will have a feeling in your chest. That is this feeling being generated. You will likely also have an emotional output that will be changed as well because you'll be in a different reference state. Sensory input necessitates emotional output. Understand that concepts create feelings and feelings create concepts. But when you're continuously creating concepts and not worrying about or not thinking about the feelings, you can't really think about feelings, but when you're not tapping into the feeling, when you're not tapping into what it is that you actually desire. And remember, what you actually do to tap into the feeling is not by thinking what you want. It's about tapping into the core themes of what you want. The more foundational the part of your desire is, the more coherently you'll be able to generate feeling. Because you may say, oh, my SP loves me, I want that. But there's nothing there. There's no meaning to that. There's no feeling there. There's nothing there. That has no power to you. Because you've not associated a meaning to it. There's no feeling to back it up. This is why when you tap into the theme, especially when you think about what lacks in your life, what are you not looking at? What it is that you're not looking at what it is that's continually bothering you is where you should be looking, because that's where the resistive pathways are. That's where your disproportionality in context and false identifications through incorrect feeling is coming from. Remember, you're always in feeling. You're always feeling into a state of some kind. It's just that your default state is likely a disproportional one, and you've got all of these states that are jumping around all over the place, and they're incoherent. Hence why you've got scattered manifestations, scattered results, scattered reality. Where you have hot and cold behavior, you have signs, where you have whatever. And even if you're thinking the same things, not changing the feeling because it's not cohering the states, because you're not building ideal context. You're not in state streak, you're not in flow, you're not actually going about manifesting your desires from a core level. Get into the themes that underlie and exist within all of these states. Get into the themes and work from those themes. The themes of what you want is really where we should be focusing on. For example, some people, it could be a theme of independence that could underlie their need for money and the love, right? They don't have that feeling, and when they tap into the theme of having independence, the feeling comes up. But what's integrated within that theme is the money and the SP. Do you understand? That's why things unfold without you thinking about them to unfold. How did you get your first love? How did you get your first money? You never constantly, thought about getting it. You might have been excited about it. Not everybody would have been, but oftentimes it just shows up out of nowhere when we least expect it. When we least expect it is when things show up, because it's an unconscious process. It's the feeling aligning. And that's also the secret to instant manifestation. The secret to instant manifestation is feeling. State streak. Coherency of states. That's how instant manifestations show up. That's all I really need to say. There is no probability functions. There is no wave-particle duality. Quantum mechanics is a flawed model. It's fundamentally incorrect. It doesn't explain manifesting. The law, the so-called law, it is the mechanics. There is no spiritual realm. That's all self-recursive cycles of taking embodiment. I haven't gone into the depth of that here, but as I said, all self-recursive circuits are conscious by default. And self-recursive circuits also exist in your mind as thought forms, which can take embodiment as beings and can show up in your consciousness as beings. I coach people to actually tap into this sense. I don't teach this publicly because to some people not everybody should be applying this, what I'm going to be coaching people with, because there are things that need to be worked out first. It's a process, right? As I said, everything's integrated within everything else. That's why I don't teach these more in-depth techniques publicly, because sometimes it can be used the wrong way. That's why you should seek coaching with me, because I'm the only one who understands how this works, truly. Nobody else understands the mechanics of reality. Nobody else understands how assumptions are built, fundamentally. Nobody spent 8 years diving into physics textbooks, diving into historical textbooks, connecting the dots, reading everything, spending tens of thousands of hours trying to figure out how reality works before they came out and spoke. I waited before I came out and spoke. I waited 8 years. I waited 8 years before I came out and spoke, because I wanted to develop a model that was logically consistent and coherent and made sense in every regard, and connected all the dots and explained everything, which reality synthesis does. I coach using this model, and I guarantee results, pretty much, if you apply it correctly, within ideally less than 3 weeks. I've seen massive shifts, other people have seen massive shifts. It's the way it works. You can't fail when you work with this model. You can't fail if you have a reference state that you draw yourself into, persist in the reference state. Continuously think of the themes and use those as your basis of embodiment. Build ideal context, cohere the states, and you will gradually shift. You may even wake up one day and have a huge change in the way that you perceive reality. That's how things work, guys. That's how reality synthesis works. That's how manifestation works. That's how you manifest everything. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, please share. Actually share the video around everywhere. Post it on every feed you can, because everybody needs to know about reality synthesis. Everybody does. Every person on earth needs to know about reality synthesis, because it's the correct model. All of the manifestation gurus that think that they know things need to be refuted, because they screwed me and too many other people over and gaslit us with not persisting in the thoughts, which is nonsense, and that's not how it works. And I strongly recommend you that if you actually want to manifest what you want, like finally actually do it. If you truly want to manifest what you want, contact me, get some coaching with me, we'll sort things out. I guarantee that you will get results very quickly. I'll give you a field geometry graph which will give you the theme that you need to tap into, through which you can build the feeling, the ideal context, and cohere the states. It's very simple, it's not hard. Book a coaching session with me, ideally for 30 days, because that's usually how long people need to take, and I guarantee that the result that you get will be very quick and rapid, right? You should get your manifestation in 3 weeks, if you apply these techniques correctly, of course. That's how I've experienced it myself. That's how most people I work with experience it. They see shifts within 3 weeks. And it's all explained with reality synthesis. All of it. There's nothing that's incoherent. There's nothing that's illogical. It all connects. Everything is fractally, proportionally, interferometrically integrated as processes within processes. And that's how it works. So as I said, thanks for watching. Share it, like it, comment, try and criticize my model if you want. Try and go ahead. I love to see you try. Go on. Try and point out some flaws in my model. I really, actually, constructive feedback would be much appreciated, because then I can refine my model even further and then, patch up any holes that I may still have that I'm unaware of. So any criticism is actually welcome. I welcome it. But any kind of feedback would be appreciated, regardless if it's good or bad. Liking and sharing the video everywhere would also be greatly appreciated. We need to get the word out about reality synthesis to replace the standard model so people can figure out the process as to how to actually manifest, and not just have all these, random thoughts about what we should and shouldn't be doing out, people just talking about incoherently. Anyway, I'm done with this video, guys. Go back and watch it again if you need to. Actually take some notes, write down some notes, take down some notes, understand what I'm saying. I'm serious, understand what I'm saying, and you will understand how manifesting works, and you will no longer doubt. You will not need to think about yourself as the God-like being, I'm the God of my reality. No, you don't need to think about that. This will come as a result of that. You will think of yourself differently if you apply this process. You don't need to consciously think of yourself differently when you apply this, because it necessitates it. It necessitates the change on a conceptual level through the feeling, through the context. The thoughts come through the context. They build each other up. Not the other way around. The thoughts can result in feelings, but only if those feelings are, again, proportionally based. And truly what it is that needs to be worked with. Which is, again, what I coach with. So I can help you actually figure out the thing that you need to work with in order to figure out what you need to do to manifest. And when you actually tap into that, you will feel it. You will literally feel it in your pericardium. It will feel like this like amped up feeling. I wouldn't say amped up, but it'll give you this impulse, an aha moment. That's how you know it's right. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I will post more videos on this in more detail on each of these little bits, probably in the future. And I'll see you next time, guys. So stay legendary.